Hello and welcome to the first ever Polity Matters called meeting. These called meetings will be periodic shows that allow us to distribute bonus content to you, our dear listeners. Interviews, ramblings, special topics, you'll find it all in this occasional format. These called meetings will also transform you listeners into viewers, as you can plainly see. Our plan is to post these extra episodes on our YouTube channel, as well as on our regular podcast feed. So if you're getting this particular show as audio only right now, be sure to check out the show notes where we have a link to our YouTube channel, and you can watch us in living color. On this edition of Called Meeting, Jared sits down with ruling elder Howie Donahoe to discuss everything from GA moderating to overture writing. Thanks for listening and for watching. Enjoy the show.
Well, welcome to Polity Matters. This is a special episode, a type that we're going to be calling a called meeting, where we talk to somebody about a particular subject or get more insight into perhaps just being a good churchman. And for our first such episode, I'm happy to introduce ruling elder Howie Donahoe. Howie's been in the PCA for over 4 decades, if I can date you that much. You've been a ruling elder for, I think, 37 years, served as a clerk in several churches, one of which you may not know is only like 15 miles south of me here. Different presbytery, but right. Nearby. But if you are a PCA General Assembly enjoyer, you probably know him as best as the moderator of the 47th General Assembly. So welcome, Howie.
Thank you. Good, glad to be here.
Well, thanks for being on. I wanted to talk to you about a few different things, some of it just getting to know you as a churchman. And then I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your role as moderator, but then also get into a particular subject that is of interest to perhaps people around this time, which is writing overtures, something that you have a little bit of experience with. But I introduced you a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit about your faith? When did you come to faith? Did you grow up in a Christian home? And when did you get interested in Presbyterian polity?
Yeah, I grew up in an Irish Catholic family, 6 kids, born in Pittsburgh, moved to Ohio, then New Jersey, then back to Mount Lebanon in the southern parts of Allegheny County for high school. Went to church every Sunday, was pretty serious about that faith. Church anyway, and was dating a gal whose mother came to faith through John Guest in that Episcopal church in Sewickley. And then the daughter, the gal I was dating, came to faith. She got me reading C.S. Lewis, and Christmas of my senior year of college, I realized that what grace was. And so then graduated from the academy, went to flight school, met a guy who was raised as a conservative Baptist. So I went to Conservative Baptist Church in Gilbert, Arizona for 3 years. Came to understand that there were some Protestant churches that were not pro-life and some that were. After seeing Francis Schaeffer and C. Everett Koop do a seminar at Arizona State. And so then when I moved to in the Air Force, transferred to Tacoma, Washington to fly different airplanes, I kind of had a pretty good idea which denominations were pro-life. And in those days, we used the Yellow Pages. So I was going through the Yellow Pages and visiting different churches. And one day I ended up at Faith Tacoma and been in the PCA ever since 1982, I guess.
Yeah, and then you've been in PCA churches in Pittsburgh area, and then now you're in the Pacific Northwest. So what was it that actually took you different places in your vocation?
Yeah, well, when I got out of the Air Force, got married, wanted to work actually pro-life full-time, but there was a retired Navy ruling elder. He said, well, the airlines are hiring. Can't you do both at the same time? And I took his advice. Went to work for U.S. Airways, got based in D.C., PCA church there. And we couldn't buy a house, couldn't afford a house in D.C., so we moved to Pittsburgh, and U.S. Airways had a big crew base in Pittsburgh. So that's when we were at Providence for 12 years. And then we had homeschooled the kids and didn't really feel like we could do it very well in high school. So we were looking for a PCA church and a U.S. Airways crew base and a good Christian school. And we were living in the South Hills in Bridgeville. So there was one in Penn Hills, but we didn't want to commute to that. So we moved to Charlotte, went to Christ Covenant and Covenant Day School. And then we were there for about 10 years, and Deb's folks were getting older, Seattle and Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. So we moved out to Seattle, and I finished my career out there, 10 years there. I was commuting from Seattle to Philly or Charlotte or LA to fly my trips from Seattle.
And still within that, you were ordained as a ruling elder and then started to serve within the church. And sometimes we use this term, being a good churchman. How would you define being a churchman, or what made you think I need to be more than just serving in the local church, but serving at presbytery, serving at General Assembly, and being a good churchman?
Yeah, well, I was ordained when I was 31, which was at least 10 years too early. I can get into that later. At Christ Church, Arlington. And at the time, I didn't even know what presbytery was or presbytery meetings were, because our pastor at the time didn't really tell us. I mean, I should have known, but I didn't. So I didn't go to any presbytery meetings till I moved to Pittsburgh, Providence Pres, and Art Broadwick was a pastor, and he was serious about polity and presbytery. So I started getting involved up there, and it really was something I was just personally interested in. I like doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess that's when it started, and then went to general. I think I've been to 29 or 30 general assemblies, and first couple, I didn't know what was going on, and but eventually you figure it out.
Yeah, there's a learning curve, especially at PCAGA.
And I had a career that allowed me flexibility that others don't have. I mean, we've got an elder in our session. He's a doctor with little kids, and he just doesn't have nearly the flexibility that I had flying. I could arrange the schedule to make presbytery meetings and things like that. So I was blessed that way. So
yeah. Within church polity suggests politics. Sometimes you get different groups that form. In fact, PCA came from certain groups that were concerned within the PCUSA. I think it's kind of funny, as I've paid attention since I've been ordained, not quite as long ago, almost 15 years ago. But there's groups like that will advocate one way, like a GRN, Gospel Reformation Network, and other groups that have been known, such as National Partnership. And something that I've always kind of found a little funny is you have friends that are people like Fred Greco, and I think you've been to at least one of the GRN conferences. And then you tried to get some guys that were in GRN and National Partnership together, which I think made some people label you one way or another. But I guess what I'm asking is being a churchman, what role do groups and sides have? And what's maybe some of the disadvantages or advantages of that? And how have you seen your role as a churchman in the midst of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard for me to be friends with people that I disagree with. I mean, there are guys on the SJC that I vote differently from often, but they're actually the guys I hang out with the most, probably. Yeah, I guess I'm ambivalent about political groups, but I'm not ambivalent about people being able to energetically advocate for a position or recruit others for a position. So I don't have that big a heartburn about that. I do think it's good for people to vote knowledgeably, not just because somebody tells them to vote a certain way, but at the same time, if I'm at least early on in General Assembly and Presbytery attendance, if I wasn't that familiar with an issue that was coming up for vote, if I knew that somebody who I think, like most often, was voting a certain way, I didn't feel bad about voting that way. So I don't know, it's kind of a mixed bag, I guess.
All right. Well, then let me ask you about a particular way in which you've been involved as a churchman, which has been you were moderator.
Yeah.
Little trivia fact: I think you were the longest serving moderator of the PCA since we canceled 2020. Is that right?
Yeah, I canceled 2020 just for that reason.
Yes, just to be a trivia answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a few questions about that. What was the most interesting or unexpected part about being moderator? I mean, we can read about what the moderator does in BCO and RAO, and it's not a long description, and so maybe you don't know all what to expect.
Well, yeah, you've got to prepare for it. I knew I was going to be nominated, so John Bice and I prepared together, and you get pretty familiar with the docket. You get pretty familiar with where minority reports might be. You got to watch the clock because you got to try to guide the ship through the canal in time. But I mean, having been to a lot of Presbyterian meetings and GAs, I was familiar enough with Roberts, and there's also parliamentarians. So nothing really surprised me that much. But I will say there was, I'll make fun of myself here. There was a point towards the end of the Thursday night, it was almost midnight, and I was tired. I knew we were going to adjourn that night. And somebody was delivering a minority report that I was confident didn't have a chance of passing, but they have a right to do that. So I went back and sat down and wasn't really paying attention. And someone went to a mic and yelled, point of order, point of order. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know what that guy was saying. I'm in trouble now. So I went to the mic and the guy said his point of order. And I mumbled something like, well, just keep it germane and continue or whatever. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So try to have caffeine up there is what you're saying.
Have caffeine up there, at least towards the end. Right?
Yeah. So you had said there at the 47th General Assembly, actually both you and Bice were nominated.
Yeah.
So in essence, running against each other, but although it wasn't really necessarily framed that way, you won, and then you nominated Bice at the 49th General Assembly. So do you want to talk a little bit about what was going on there and that relationship a little bit?
Yeah, John and I have been friends pretty much since coming on the SJC. Neither one of us thought it was a problem in Dallas. People could pick who they wanted as the moderator, but I was pretty confident he was going to be the next ruling elder moderator. But I knew there would be another competitive election, I guess. But nothing. I mean, we talked about who would be good on the sexuality committee because that was a hot topic at the time, and he gave me some names that I hadn't thought of, and so that was, we just helped each other prepare for the GA. So
yeah, so you at least knew that he was prepared, even though he didn't get it at the 47th.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he was. Yep. Yeah. And that's if you're not, then I mean it's gonna be tough. I mean, I had this big notebook with all my little tabs on it and stuff, and so you need to be. But and I think the EPC has they have a moderator and a moderator in waiting or something, like a moderator elect, and he's normally elected the next year as the moderator, but doesn't have to be. It's still an election the following year, but the wisdom of that is at least it gets a guy ready, prepped.
Yeah.
Now I think Fred,
like an understudy.
I think Fred knew he was probably going to run out of posts. So, if you were there, you realize he was very unprepared.
Well, the actually in our presbytery we do that. I don't know if yours does, where we have a moderator and we have a vice moderator. And
nice.
They step in if they can't make it, and then they're usually voted in next time. So not a bad practice.
Fred didn't have to prepare. I know he did, but he knows that stuff pretty well.
Yeah. a lot of the things that you do as moderator are at the assembly, to something that is outlasts that in terms of something that's going on after that, would be the study committee selections and for those to do their work. First, is there anything else that a moderator does like outside of General Assembly, or after that, is it just kind of largely over?
It's largely over. There's a cooperative ministries committee, which is the heads of the committees and agencies and the chief operating officers of each, and the last 6 moderators. It meets for a one-day meeting in January in Atlanta, and the moderator of the last General Assembly moderates that meeting, but it's essentially done. It's not like the moderator of Presbytery, who appoints commissions, who might be initiating investigations, stuff like that, because we have a stated clerk and a staff. So it's pretty much the General Assembly. Yeah.
Well, you actually had the distinction, I don't know if this has happened often, of appointing 2 study committees.
Yeah.
One of which was the sexuality one that was dealing with issues of desires in light of especially LGBTQ thinking and reactions to that. And then the other one was DASA, the domestic abuse. It seems like today there's a lot of feeling that the sexuality debate is somewhat winding down. There's kind of a last amendment that's going through, but that seems to be winding down. I wonder if that was your take on that. While on the other side, domestic abuse, it seems like there's still some talk about some changes that need to be made, or things that need to be implemented. So where do you see those 2 things now? You helped appoint the people that were on those committees. Where do you see the work of the church still after that?
Yeah, I think your assessment's probably correct on what the level of attention is and things. And I know that some people are working on maybe, I think DASA report was 220 pages or something like that. So trying to whittle it down to a pamphlet that sessions can use. For example, every session should probably know where the women's shelter is, who the contact for that is, and child protective services, stuff like that. Best practices in nursery policies and stuff. So yeah, I expect that's going to get more attention as people implement things and realize that maybe there's a BCO provision that might help. But the DASA thing probably isn't as constitutional an issue, meaning we need to know best practices, but we don't necessarily need to codify them in the BCO. I think I know that the first overture this year is on witness testimony, and that's probably an important one, and that'll get discussed, I think, at length. But I'm not sure how much BCO change will come out of on that topic. I guess I'm not sure. I mean, we've sent one up last year, Pacific Northwest, on if there's someone who's personally offended in a 38-1 case without process, that they need to be involved more. We needed to codify that they needed to be approached and get their opinion of the confession itself and things like that.
So that if somebody had sinned against somebody else, that it wasn't just a sorry you were offended and they accept that, but actually making sure that the repentance was fits what happened to the person, right?
Yeah, and at least before the court decides it's a full statement of the facts, find out from somebody that was involved in it whether they view it as that way.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like it's even with DASA, there may be a few more things that need to change, but some of it is just actually implementing what's in our book and using it properly.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But one of the major ways you mentioned it that you've been involved in a churchman is writing overtures. I remember one year opening up the overtures page, and I think I saw 4 from Pacific Northwest, and I said out loud, "I guess Howie's been busy this year." Maybe you had a lot of flights that you're on that you were writing. So you're somebody that's written quite a few overtures, and if this is kind of overture season, that some people are thinking about them or perhaps proposing them in their presbyteries. And so, as somebody who perhaps beyond the founders, maybe you have more language in the BCO than anybody else currently active in the courts, I thought maybe I could ask you a little bit about that. First, can you just tell us first what overtures are, and when do we consider an overture at General Assembly?
Yeah, overture is basically just a law. You're writing a law because the BCO is the law book, you know. I'm sympathetic to Dr. Taylor's position. He doesn't like the book changing so frequently. So he wasn't real fond of all my writing. Or he isn't real fond. But I've been in a position on the SJC that I get to see problems in a different way maybe than some others. And if you can fix that for other presbyteries in the future with a couple sentences, then you give it a try. I think you try to write an overture that you're confident is necessary, but also confident they can get passed. 2/3 of the presbyteries is kind of hard to get. There's some presbyteries that rarely even vote, and those are no votes. So you really have to get close to 70-75% of the voting presbyteries to approve. So to me, it's no point to send an overture up that you're not pretty confident it's going to pass, because that's just a waste of people's time, I think. But and I've realized that the more words that are in an overture, the less likely it's going to pass. I was a rebel in that I didn't like the format that we were using, whereas, and then therefore, because we don't do that with motions. So I started writing them where we just said, this is what we want to do, and here's why. And I think that's easier to understand. I think it's good to get feedback on them before you send them up. And even after you send them up, if your presbytery has time, you can revise them and refile them. What we do kind of routinely in Pacific Northwest is if a session sends an overture, we consider it. And if there's general approval of it, we assign it to a commission and give the commission power to amend it and file it before the deadline, because we meet in early February, and the deadline, I think, is mid-March or mid-April anyway for CCB review if it's a BCO overture. And that way our commission has time to perfect the thing before we file it. So identify a clear problem and propose the best solution to it.
Yeah. So you're particularly talking about overtures that are like BCO, maybe RAO, which is Rules of Assembly Operation.
Right.
Of course, overtures can do other things such as direct agencies or make statements or a few other things. But if somebody's thinking, I'm thinking about writing an overture, when do you think that that's appropriate? It sounds like if it could be something that actually passes 2/3 of the presbyteries, but when else is it kind of like, okay, this is the level of an overture versus wasting people's time?
Well, if they've got a lot of experience, then they probably know whether it's needed and whether it'll pass. If they don't have a lot of experience, you need to talk to some people and say, I think, I saw this happen in my church. I think it needs to be fixed. And the people with experience can help them know whether that's gonna happen or not. But
So from real life experiences, especially if you have a problem in your church, is that where you think probably a lot of BCO changes or proposals come from?
well, most of the ones that come from Pacific Northwest come out of judicial cases.
Yeah.
So we don't want that to happen again, or obviously that paragraph or that sentence is unclear, but and the book's far from perfect, so there'll be changes year after year, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you answered one of my nerdier questions, which was which format do you prefer, the whereas or the solution with the rationale already?
Yeah.
So I didn't know that you were one of the originators of the rationale format. That's a little bit different.
Well, maybe I was. I don't know.
So in regards to all of that, you have some people that may be newer in the church, maybe newer to the courts of the church. Maybe they've gone to one or two general assemblies. What's been your experience in terms of what does it look like to be a good churchman in that people maybe are thinking about going to their second general assembly and then they want to talk or something like that? What would you give as encouragement or even a good example of being a good churchman as a young elder?
Yeah, that's a great question. Young elders are often energetic, and I'll just tell you my story. Was an elder in Arlington, Virginia, and then in Pittsburgh. And one day I read, I get Marshall Shelley, I think, is called Well-Intentioned Dragons, and realized that pretty well described my first 10 years as an elder. And so I went to both those guys at a Dallas GA and apologized to them. I said, I just read this book, and I think that was me when I was on your session. And they both said, yes, it was. We accept your apology. So watch and learn is a good thing. You know, I can't not go to a mic. That's one of my besetting sins. And I don't think I made a good speech until the 10th General Assembly I was at. So, and
do you prepare
General
any of your
Assemblies,
remarks before you speak, or do you kind of have bullet points, or you just have it off the top of your head?
it depends. I probably usually off the top of my head. Somebody says something, and I go, "Wait a minute, that's not right. I got to get to my mic." Yeah. But if it's an overture that's coming up, I'll probably prepare something. But yeah, probably mixed. But for a guy going to General Assembly, there is so much stuff, and somebody needs to sit down with them and say, "Listen, it's not all critical, okay? Don't worry about this. Don't worry about that." I remember when I was a flight instructor, I was right after flight school, came back as an instructor, and I didn't know what the Air Force was like. You know, I was a new guy. I was teaching guys how to fly, and I would be telling my guys, "You need to know this. You need to know this." And there would be a more experienced Air Force guy at the other table telling his students, "You don't need to know that. You don't need to know that." So there's a lot of stuff at GA. Yeah, you don't really need to read that. You know, when the RPR report comes out, and I don't know, it's 140 pages or something, just go look at the exceptions of substance, you know, or the unsatisfactories, you know, for responses. Those are the things that are going to get debated. So,
or
yeah,
your presbytery, if you agree with what they said.
yeah. I mean, yeah. And so a guy that's going to GA, somebody's got to help him whittle that book down.
Yeah. So find somebody in your church or in your presbytery that you can like hang on and say, "Hey, can you help me through this one?"
Yeah. And, you know, walk them through the docket and say, this is where going to be a lot of debate on this thing here. And here it's just going to be like some presentations and stuff, and let him know when he can go to the bathroom. You know, he doesn't, what part of the docket he can.
Yeah. Well, I've been to, I think, 10 general assemblies, and I've never, I think I had a point of order that was told was not really a point of order and then was dismissed. That's the only time I talked on the floor, really. But I have talked in committee of commissioners. It's a smaller group.
Sure.
What would you recommend people that are going, maybe it's their first or second general assembly? Should they get on a committee of commissioners? Should they get
Yeah,
involved
if they
with that?
can, for sure. Yeah, it's a good way to learn a couple different things. And there's always vacancies. I mean, overtures committee usually is the more experienced guys from presbyteries, but there's always a spot for somebody in a presbytery that wants to go on a committee of commissioners to learn the thing. And sometimes it's, depending on the committee and stuff, it might not be as energetic as some other committees, whatever, but it's a good way to do it. You got to fly in a little bit early. If you're on committee of commissioners that meet on Monday, you got to fly in on Sunday, but there are half the committee commissioners, or more than half, meet on Tuesday. So
yeah,
you can still fly in on Monday. Yeah.
Yeah, and even if I'm on something that doesn't take as long, Ridge Haven or something like that, then I like to go and watch overtures. Then I know what's happening before it actually gets there. Yeah,
that's awesome to do that. Yep.
Yeah, and then you probably see you speak a little bit more there than even on the floor, because you're on there about half the time, it seems like.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take Coffin's approach. So Dave's never on the overtures committee, because then he can speak on the floor. So
Yeah.
I think I'm going to let some of the younger guys in my presbytery get overtures experience. But
but I also enjoy being in there when they're crafting something and realizing, okay, it's finally gotten to the point where I think it's a good product, and it's almost like you're presenting it. And so I kind of enjoy being in that process. But yeah, then you can't speak to it when it's on the floor. So there's a give and take.
Yeah, that's why I love Jay Nykerk in overtures, because he kind of sits back and listens and listens and listens. And then he comes up with a magic sentence. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. He actually, one time I made a motion, and then he got up right after me, made amendments to fix what was wrong with my motion, and then spoke against it. And I love the fact that he was like, I want this to be good if we're going to do it, but here's why we shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
That's a good churchman there too.
He's a great guy.
Example.
Yeah.
So, and kind of like stepping back from that and thinking about that, how do we be good? I'm asking this in another way I kind of asked earlier, but how do we act as churchmen, as Christians? I mean, you've said you've learned some lessons there. How do we avoid falling into error in going in and trying to be a churchman, but doing it in a way that's unchristian? What have you learned? What tips would you give to somebody, just to kind of fill that out? How do we be Christian churchmen?
Yeah, that's a great, phenomenal question. I've had to learn how to listen better and not just watch your lips move and prepare my next comment about it or whatever. Think charitably about the other person. Meaning, don't put the worst spin on it. He's not doing this for such and such a reason or whatever, and try to get to know people, spend time with people, and communicate. Like, I remember on a commission, it was after the 1977 General Assembly, there was an ad hoc commission that was formed, and I was on, I think it was 12 of us. I know Nykerk was on it, and I was on one side of the issue, and another guy was on the other side of the issue, senior to me. And we finally just said, well, what are you afraid of? What do you want? And he said, well, I don't want us to do this. And I said, well, I don't want us to do that either, but I don't want us to do this. And he says, okay, well, I can live with that. And so it just kind of took a little talking and say, finding out really what the main concerns he has and stuff.
So be willing to change your mind and try to actually change other people's minds rather than just make a statement.
Yeah, and for me it was listening, asking, tell me why you're so passionate about something that I'm not very passionate about. What are you afraid of? What so just passion it out.
Yeah. and it's kind of wrapping up some of the things we're thinking about. What is your hope for seeing certain things in the next few years within the PCA? Is there something that we've perhaps either lost and we need to recover, or something that we need to be doing? You came in with some guys like Schaefer and those guys as kind of guiding lights. Is there are we still that same denomination, or are there things that we've missed that we need to recover, things that you want to see happen with the PCA in terms of your hopes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm thrilled to have Chapel as the stated clerk. I think Brian's got the right perspective on that question. We had a visitor to our church on Sunday, and we're not a big church, but he was from Florida. He and his wife and his granddaughter was getting baptized, and the mother of the child being baptized was their daughter. And we were talking during later, and I told him, I said, I just want to let you know, this is a good church. We're going to take care of your daughter and your granddaughter. And the guy almost started crying. So that told me we just need churches that are like that are peaceful places, that love Jesus, that can care for people, and that are, I forget who the poet was, but he used a phrase called factories of peace. And I've just always loved that phrase, factories of peace. There'll be disruptions in churches, but the idea that you can go and belong and feel the peace of Christ, the shalom, especially on the Lord's Day, is just a great thing. So, it breaks my heart and the other guys on the SJC when we have so many cases of things that it's just like, what a sad situation that must be for people in the church. So,
yeah. So it sounds like you need to be a good churchman, but you also need to be a good shepherd in your own church and be caring about what things in the local church too, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that reminds me of, I remember at Providence Presbyterian, at one point we decided all the elders had to do the same thing. And, all the elders had to do nursery, and all the elders had to do this much shepherding and phone calling and stuff. I said, wait, that doesn't make sense, because one of our elders, a guy named Don Maurer, was a blind guy, single, lived with his mom, wonderful, wonderful guy, loved to talk to people on the phone. I'm an airline pilot with, at the time, 3 little kids. I was gone half the time. You don't have to do the same thing. Each guy's got his own gifts and passions and experience. Some guys would love presbytery. Some guys would hate presbytery meetings. I mean, so yeah, I'm an advocate of, I don't know, individual gift usage or something like that.
Yeah, might have some specialties. I 2 guys that are not on our session anymore. One guy I would not put in front of a Sunday school class, but I'd always grab him to go do a hospital visit. And
Right.
Another guy was our clerk, and he could teach. But yeah, I'm going to ask the other guy. I'm not going to have him come to on our hospital visits. And
yeah, I remember with that nursery policy at Providence, Don, the blind guy, and an elder who had no kids one day, just happened to be that they were assigned to the nursery, and moms were walking up to the nursery door with their babies and just turning around and walking away. It's like neither one of these guys have ever changed a diaper.
Yeah, and Don Maurer actually will play piano for us every now and then. So I know Don, he's a good guy.
I love Don. I love him. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, kind of to wrap up, I'm going to try this as something of an experiment. If we do something of an interview, we're going to try to do a lightning round, and this is just kind of a this or this. And you can give me a sentence or two if you want to explain your answer, but if you just want to give me an answer, you can. Or if you want to avoid the question, then that's on you too. So you ready? Just this is like 7 or so, this or this. All right. Hodge or Thornwell?
Hodge.
No, any explanation, or just Hodge? Just Hodge. All right. Marvel or DC?
I have no idea.
Neither. Wine or grape juice?
Wine.
Supra or infralapsarian?
Pass.
Pass. All right. Pipe or cigar?
Cigar.
Is it pronounced GIF or GIF?
Jif.
All right.
You're talking about peanut butter, right?
I'm talking about the little files. Yeah. What about okay, and do you call the question or move the previous question?
Call the question's fine with me.
It's fine with you, just colloquial use of it. That's good. All right. Well, that's an authoritative answer. Now we have a moderator.
That was fun. That was easy.
So, all right. Well, hey, thank you so much, Howie, for joining us for this. Just good to get some advice to people about being a good churchman, about when and when not to write an overture, and a little bit of insight into what you did. And just thank you for being a churchman and for joining us here today. So any last things that you want to say?
Something I just remembered is that you can't ask an SJC guy about a pending case, but I've got a list of 10 or 12 guys that have been on the SJC that aren't on right now. And when people ask me stuff, I just send it to them. I say, you can contact one of these guys. And that would help people a lot, I think.
So are you talking about writing overtures, or are you talking about if something happens within the church?
You got something, there's a case pending. You're a clerk of a presbytery and there's an appeal and you don't know how to process it for going to the SJC or what. You can call any number of guys who've been on the SJC and ask them, and they're not restricted from giving you advice, procedural advice or any kind of advice, but we are on the SJC.
Well, I may need to get that list from you at some point. I think it'd be a good idea to at some point have some sort of a guide for people that are wondering how does the process work, or if something happens in the church and they want to know what are my options, and to get something like a short guide or a pamphlet for that. You can't always hand people that large DASA report. It would be good to have something that's a little bit more digestible. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks a lot for joining us today, Howie.
My pleasure. Thanks for doing this.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you for joining us for this first installment of Called Meeting. If you're interested in learning more about anything we addressed, check out the show notes in your podcast player or at politymatters.org. If you enjoyed the show, consider following us on Twitter and Facebook at Polity Matters, and subscribe in your podcast app of choice. If you have questions or comments, you can contact us at politymattersfeedback@gmail.com. A special thanks to Howie for joining us on the show today. He serves the PCA in many ways, from the local church all the way up to the General Assembly, and we are grateful for all of his work. Scott, as you remember, is the senior minister of Providence PCA in Troy, Illinois. You can find him on Twitter at @sedberg. If you're looking for Jared, he's the pastor of New Life Presbyterian Church of Hopewell Township in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, and he's on Twitter at Brother Nelson. I serve as the associate pastor at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Cleveland, Mississippi, and I'm on Twitter at _Ben Ratliff. As always, thank you for spending time with us. Y'all take care.